Hello, everyone, and welcome to A View from the Ridge, the Spalding Ridge podcast featuring myself, Emil Fernandez, and Sarah Katz. We are both partners at Spalding Ridge, and we wanted to put together this podcast to talk today a little bit about cash flow and liquidity and what sort of changes and impacts we've seen with our clients as they've navigated or are navigating, I should say, the COVID-19 crisis. So today we'll talk a little bit about cash flow and liquidity and what some of our clients are experiencing. We'll talk a little bit about what impacts it's had to their business, as well as what we see the recovery starting to look like, and then maybe some long-term lessons learned and some lasting impacts after this crisis has passed. So Sarah, why don't we start with you? And as we talk, I know you're out there talking to a lot of clients. What are some of the things you're hearing as clients sort of tackle some of these issues related to cash flow and liquidity?
Yeah, and I mean, hi everybody. Emil and I have been talking about this a lot, especially with our clients, but even with each other and just what's been in the news. And I think the most interesting part of it, when you stop the growth or you don't know what growth is going to look like, you have to understand, well, most of the industries, and depending on which it is, if it's in tech, if it's in oil and gas, if it's in healthcare, where they are of the side of, are they, I wouldn't say benefiting, but I would say, are they contributing or essential to what needs to be done and what is necessary? Or are they on the other end, which is more unpredictable and less of importance at this time? And so that's when cash really comes into play. The thing about cash too, it doesn't just happen overnight either. So either you have, and you were risk averse, or you were very conservative and you had a lot of cash on hand, or your business more is on reoccurring revenue, so it's a lot more predictable, or you have very small margins and very tight ability to create profit that then potentially plays into cash. So that's what I've been seeing right now is the industries and companies that are able to forecast or have some type of continuous revenue stream, like software, is able to have a lot better position, and especially everything going digital. So that's what I've been seeing. On the other hand, the ones with small margins, or the ones that are very dependent on person interaction, and specifically that might have not had such a digital footprint or e-commerce view, are having a lot more difficult time because they're spending the cash that they do have to be able to pivot as quickly as they can to be able to offer their services. So that's what I've been seeing. What about you, Emil?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things you mentioned, it depends on the industry. So we've seen some industries that already had a lot of virtualization in place, companies that had remote workforces, companies that are, in sort of knowledge workers or have knowledge workers in the business. They're able to deliver their products and services remotely. And so those companies have not been impacted as greatly. But, sadly, we have a lot of clients who, there is no way to deliver remote services. For example, if you're running an airline, you depend on people physically being passengers on your planes. So those companies have been impacted. But, I think for the companies that have had pretty severe impacts because of COVID, we've seen a shift towards cash preservation, certainly being able to have short-term visibility into liquidity, being able to access revolving lines of credit, being able to access the capital markets and issue additional debt, and then obviously being able to cut costs. So we're working with some clients right now who are doing some what I would really call emergency workforce planning, which is a sort of euphemism for headcount reductions and furloughs. And I think some of it really depends on the company, whether or not they're using a blunt instrument or a scalpel. For companies that, frankly, don't have a lot of sophistication around the forecasting and the modeling of how they can look at cash flow and how they can look at impacts to cash flow with headcount and expense reductions. it's a blunt instrument. We need to lay off 25% of our workforce. I think for companies that have a little bit more visibility because they've got better systems in place or they've got better processes in place, they can be more targeted. They can use a scalpel to be very precise in the reductions they're making, and not just the number of reductions, but where are those reductions taking place and how are you phasing them in. But to your point, yeah, Sarah, I mean, we see a lot of companies right now really focusing on cash flow as opposed to EBITDA or net income. Really, free cash flow is sort of the only metric that matters, because that's the one that determines whether or not you stick around for the recovery. So, and I know it's premature to start talking about recovery, but I know, Sarah, we were talking about this earlier. You mentioned, for example, in South Korea, where they had one of the swiftest responses to the COVID-19 crisis. They've already reopened their economy, and they're seeing some interesting effects of that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And I think that the surprise to me was when things are good, that people get a little bit more comfortable with not tracking things precisely or accurately, or even just having a good understanding on the individual cash components and how that looks like. And now with looking at certain countries or states are coming back online, and we were just talking about this beforehand, is what will that look like? And we're test running it with South Korea, and I think what was interesting is that it came back and it was very quick. It was 4 days. And how do you plan for that? Like, you just shut the valve. You go like, hey guys, thanks for trying. Go back home. We're going to try again and repivot. So like, to me, I'm always thinking about, how are you going to model that? Like, how are you going to predict or assess or understand that you're going to try a different direction, but like, what will be the metrics or information that you need to say like it's working or not working. So I think that's what's interesting to me right now, is as we look at people going back into their offices, or as we see people going and opening up bars and restaurants, is how do you know what the right capacity is? How do you assess like the risk? What happens if it doesn't go well? Like, what is that number? And I guess, Emil, like, have you been thinking about it a little bit more? I know Texas is being more lenient in the direction or trying out different things than some of the other states.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all based on the, where the impact has been greatest. I mean, fortunately, in Texas, we haven't had such a big impact to begin with. But yeah, you're right. I mean, trying to figure out what's the right approach to reopening. Especially we're talking about businesses that rely on interpersonal reaction or interactions, like restaurants and bars, for example. I think, for most of us, or most of the companies that are, it's even more of a macro question of, as they recover, as they have to, if they have either shut down or scaled back operations, the question is, how do you start scaling them back up? I mean, I think, and it's the same challenges you have on the scale down, you have those same challenges on the scale back up, right? So you want to, I think it's the difference between, a chaotic shutdown and a chaotic reopening, that you want to have an orderly shutdown and an orderly reopening and being able to get back to business. The first question is, does the business model change? Some companies, I think, have had to make changes to the business model just based on their ability to conduct business. Other businesses, not so much. I think one of the interesting things is since we all have shifted into a remote working model, I shouldn't say everybody, but those of us who are fortunate to be in jobs where we can work remotely, I think one of the questions is going to be, does everyone go right back to the office, or do you continue to have a remote employee model? There was an article I was reading not too long ago saying that I think companies are re-examining their commercial leases, and if we had 20,000 square feet of office space, do we really need it? Because we've been able to function in a remote working environment. Likewise, as you bring workers back on, as you bring employees back on. You may want to do it in phases. And again, waiting, this all goes back to free cash flow and being able to make sure that as you phase back in, you have an orderly plan for the recovery, so that you don't just get right back to where you were. But I want to come back to the South Korea example for a minute. As they reopened the businesses, they did find that there was another wave of COVID cases. And so to your point, it ends up being this, sinusoidal effect where you have a peak, a shutdown, a peak, a shutdown, and it may just go like that, like a sine wave, for the next 2 or 3 years until we come up with a vaccine. So I think this sadly may be the new normal, where we're having this, kind of, peaks and valleys as we reopen and then have to shut back down again. But I guess back to this topic of cash flow and liquidity, what does that mean for companies? Like, what does that mean, Sarah, for a company that knows that they're going to have a shutdown and, a period of business followed by another shutdown, maybe open for business again? How do you manage that, or how do you plan for that?
Well, that's the thing. I think you need to have a lot of different viewpoints, scenarios that you're running through. So one could be knowing that, how do you truly reopen? And that's a facility question. That's a health question. There's like a whole punch list, checklist on logistics and facility operations that people really need to, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking through. I know that Salesforce just came out with the work.com just to help with the analytics of it. Because the thing about right now is, if you follow the cash, that's cash outflow that needs to happen to be in a good position to set up your environment so that people can safely come into place. The second thing is you have to think about is, okay, if I do have people come in and only 30-40% of them, then the 30-40% have an advantage of being in the office, and then the rest have a disadvantage. And then how do you track people of what makes sense to be productive? So do you keep it very, very equal, or a baseline? And so that's another thing. And then you start adding, okay, now we have a shutdown. How do I quickly communicate that, make sure that productivity isn't impacted? Because wow, if you're going to be going in a roller coaster and having people you're good, no, we're not, we're good. So I am wondering if some people are really going to take the safe route and just say, maybe not till 2021, or maybe not till end of fourth quarter. And that means hopefully people continue seeing productivity that are still, engaged. And then with that said is, what do you do with your commercial space? What do you do with everything else? Do you still, maintain that?
Yeah. By the way, I know I sometimes get a little too nerdy, and I use terms like sinusoidal wave, and you use terms like roller coaster. I think roller coaster is probably a much more user-friendly term. So thank you for that one.
Trying to simplify it.
Yeah, and I guess the other comment I would make is, I think one of the things we'll see. Remember, so it's 2020. We've been 10 years plus since the Great Recession, and we've been in a very, cheap money market for the last 10 years, where access to debt has been very inexpensive. Low interest rates have been the norm for the last 10 years. And so I think one of the things we've seen is that, companies, particularly, public companies with access to the debt markets, have racked up some pretty incredible levels of debt. And so, companies, I think, are pretty highly leveraged now. And so one of the things we've seen, again, I'll just go back to airlines for a minute. Airlines have racked up a tremendous amount of debt to fuel growth over the last decade. But now when they have to, turn the spigot off and they have to slow down the business, that debt becomes pretty significant, and a large amount of your cash flow is going to debt service. So, I wonder if, one of the takeaways here is that, companies are going to think twice about how much debt they carry if they know we're going to be in this kind of start-stop economy for the next few years. Obviously, it's not easy to unwind billions or trillions of dollars worth of debt overnight. But I did see, going back to the airlines, United Airlines today, they were going to go out and get another $2 billion of short-term debt. And they pulled that from the street, so they decided against it. So maybe cutting operational costs as opposed to going back out to the debt markets. But I think this is going to be an interesting thing. I'm interested to see how this is going to play out over time. Well, I guess just third and sort of final chapter here, just as we talk about this, what do you think, Sarah, are going to be the long-term effects? So after, crises come and go. We will recover in some way, shape, or form. But what do you think are some of the impacts from a cash and liquidity standpoint, but an overall business standpoint, that we're going to see that are maybe going to be different, after COVID than they were before COVID?
So I break it out into like 3 areas, which is like the human aspect of things, the global or country or down to state, and more on the national or like looking at it globally, and then really the company area and organizations and industries. And so I think on the human front, I believe that maybe it's for the short term, but I really think that has made, at least myself personally, realizing like we're not immortal. Health is.
You can speak for yourself, Sarah. I don't know what you're talking about.
Maybe this is just my take, but it's that whole, we've been hearing about from Bill Gates and from others, and I do think we are going to be more in tuned on a health front, understanding and appreciating what it means from good healthcare, good support from that front. And then also just like the way that we work together, and others that have been even supporting us through this, right? Delivering groceries or being able to support that type of, getting food or groceries to grocery stores, so that, and just supporting one another. So I am interested to see how people are going to interact and appreciate different skill sets. So I think that there is going to be some change there. I think from specifically, if you think about cash and globally, there is a certain amount of like key banks and where cash sits, like US, Europe, and then others. So who's going to be stuck with the check or stuck with the bill actually? And how are we going to be able to come back from this is an area that I've been very interested in. I do think that digital currency of some sort is going to continue to rise as people want to get more familiar with different types of mechanics. So I think that's going to, like, just digital in general is going to make a big impact. I think people know the virtual, being able to collaborate virtually, being able to support business virtually, being able to exchange money or sign contracts is going to be a big impact, and it's going to continue to rise. And then the last thing is with businesses and organizations is we are, I'm hoping to going to come out of this smarter with how we use people and technology, and and even like the telemedicine, and I'm not going to steal your thunder, Emil, I know you're going to probably jump into that, but just like robotics, telemedicine, everything that could be automated or done differently has been absolutely pushed to, I don't even know, like 20, 30 years earlier, maybe even more. So we are now looking at things that are forcing change versus like taking our time. So that's
I agree. I think this thing has been a catalyst that's, maybe not created new technologies, but certainly accelerated the adoption I mean, I think that's my big takeaway, is that technologies that were maybe creeping up slowly have gotten sort of just a giant boost in acceleration. Telemedicine is one. We talked about that earlier. That was something that was very slow to adopt, or just sort of emerging, and now it's become of necessity. I mean, business collaboration. We were already using video conferencing on Zoom, but now, even my parents are using Zoom now, and my kids are using Zoom to take online classes at school. So, which I don't know if that's the best thing, but definitely, collaboration, digital collaboration is big. I think another one is, digital contracts and digital signature. One of our partners is DocuSign, and their stock has hit an all-time high during the COVID crisis. So clearly, companies are adopting, digital signature technologies, digital contract technologies, to make commerce easier. So I think to your point, a lot of these cloud-based digital technologies that enable business to be done anywhere, from your phone, from your living room, from your couch, those are going to be with us, I mean, for the long run. And tying back to our theme of cash flow and liquidity, I mean, I do think that companies may think twice about going into really highly leveraged situations. I think companies are going to have to get a little bit more conservative about cash management, just given the unpredictability of where we may be in these next few years. And then just remote workers. I mean, I think we're going to see the impact of that too. So yeah, I think we'll see some permanent changes that'll come out of this. I personally hope we don't stop shaking hands, and that's been kind of a weird thing for me, is being sequestered at home, not being able to go visit clients face to face. But hopefully we get to that point, sooner rather than later. Any closing comments, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I am just as interested to see how this all plays out as everybody else. I will say that I have become smarter with my own cash and how I'm spending it. I know I've been seeing a lot of people are like online shopping or like spending their dollars in different ways. But I'm hoping even individually that we take a moment and realize you need a rainy day fund, because you never know. So I think like collectively, from the individual all the way to countries, everyone's learning sort of that lesson, like you really never know.
Yeah.
So cash is important for all.
Well, I can tell you, I've saved a ton of cash on haircuts during this crisis. So learning to cut my own hair has been an experience. But on that note, I think we'll wrap up. So again, my name is Emil Fernandez. My partner here, Sarah Katz. We are both partners at Spalding Ridge, and this has been A View from the Ridge. Have a great day.